Howdy, folks, and welcome to the Daily Coin. My name is Rory, and I appreciate you tuning in today. I have on the line Mr. Dave Kranzler. You probably know him as Dave from Denver, and you know his work from truthingold.com. Dave just recently launched a new website called investmentresearchdynamics.com, and that's where you'll find his work at today. Dave and I are in the middle of a fireside chat, and we're going to let you listen in. You're going to hear topics such as the forthcoming or the ongoing, I should say, economic collapse, the state of our economy in general, the creeping police state, Germany's gold, Ukraine's gold, precious metals in general, and a host of other topics. I'm glad you tuned in today because I think that you're going to find this rather entertaining and hopefully informative. We're going to join the conversation in progress, so let's get started, and here we go.
The whole thing in Colorado with the legalized marijuana, the feds could at any time come in and shut down everything and seize cash and assets on all those shops.
Yes.
Right. So, and when Amendment 64 first passed in this state, and and there was the issue about whether or not Obama and Eric Holder were going to come in here and try and stop it. I started researching what would give them the right, and then I came across the Commerce Clause, and that's what gives the feds the ability to trump state law, because in the Constitution it specifically says states have rights that trump federal law. But it was the Commerce Clause, and it was kind of interesting. I think it had to do with either wheat or corn that was being sold from one Midwest state to another or something. I forget the specific details, but that's kind of what gives the federal government ultimately the power to trump state rights, which I think is total bullshit.
But there's also another clause in the Constitution that says that any law that goes against the Constitution is in fact unconstitutional and null and void. So,
I haven't come across that. I didn't realize that. I'll tell you what's interesting about all of this stuff, kind of an overarching issue here. When I first started getting into the whole precious metal sector and diving headfirst into it, it was like late 2001. And I remember at the time, there used to be guys who would write about how eventually we're going to start to see states secede from the Union. And I was thinking to myself, maybe, I think the most likely candidates were always the usual: Montana, Idaho, Vermont, Texas. And I was trying to think what the angle would be. And, one of the issues would be, let's say Illinois or California goes tits up, they go bankrupt, and the federal government comes in and says, okay, we're going to bail you out. Well, how does that make taxpayers in South Dakota feel? Their state's in pretty good fiscal shape, and their tax money is being used to bail out California or Illinois. That's going to be an issue down the road, and that was one thing that I thought could lead to secession. But the pot thing, the marijuana thing, because
yes.
There's medical marijuana, I think, in 12 states now.
At least.
Yeah, and then 2 states are completely legal, Colorado and Washington.
Yes.
So there's that issue. And I do know that the feds this isn't being publicized, but I have a good family friend who I play tennis with. He used to be a law partner with my father. Got some clients who were invested in pot shops. The feds came in and shut them down, and it would never have made the news. Now, there were other issues there. They got them on money laundering and tax evasion, and that was their angle for coming in and shutting these things down. But according to my buddy, he said they're fighting it because he said he doesn't think it's valid.
That's good. That's good that he's fighting it.
But I did find that it was interesting that they are actually coming in and going after some of these shops, but they're finding a different angle besides the marijuana thing.
Yes. Well, I mean, that was the same thing they did with Al Capone back in the 30s.
Right. Well, there you go.
They couldn't get him on. They
Capone
couldn't
was
get him on
really
the mafia, on the on the murders and so forth, but they could get him on the RICO.
yeah. Well, and he was guilty, but
He was guilty,
my,
yes.
my guess is these people in these shops, whether or not they're guilty of the crimes they're being accused of and closed down for, I don't think my friend would take on the case unless he thought it was a gray area.
Well,
So,
that's good. I mean,
and then the gun control thing too. I mean, at some point, we could start to see states decide to pull out of the union.
like in Colorado, there's a handful of counties, I believe, up in the
Oh yeah,
northwest
yeah,
corner or northeast. It's either the northeast corner or the northwest corner that
yeah.
they're looking to secede. Same thing in California. California has a group of it's either 5 or 7 counties that are calling themselves the state of Jefferson. They're making pretty good progress, and that's just two that jump to mind. I mean, they're just right on the tip of my tongue. I mean, there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people talking about seceding because they're sick of it, and it's because of what you've just been talking about as far as why is my money? Why are they taking money out of my wallet and giving it to these scumbag banksters and then not prosecuting them for fraud? Hello, that's
Well,
an issue.
it's that plus that they actually J.P. Morgan raked over the Denver uh, public employee pension fund here, the teachers fund.
Yes.
The guy who is now one of the senators from Colorado. He was in charge of the school system back then. This is I think in the early 2000s. Bennett, that's his name, Bennett, Michael Bennett. He's a Phil Anschutz puppet, and he used to work at J.P. Morgan. And he's buddies with him, and they plugged the pension fund with derivatives that they lost, I think, like $200 million on. And they had no business with these derivatives in their fund.
Well,
and then Bennett's reward was he gets elected to the Senate.
Wonder where he got his funding from.
As a Democrat, too, no less. I mean, my parents voted for him. I could have strangled my parents. Kidding me?
Oh yeah, it's something.
Truth be told, I have not voted since 1992. I'm not registered because I believe that, first of all, there's no difference between the parties.
Correct.
And voting just voting because it's your patriotic duty and it's your chance to have a voice, that's total bullshit. But when you vote, it's actually voting in support of a system that doesn't work, because by the act of voting, you're saying, okay, I'm going to legitimize this system by voting for it.
I'm not sure what we can do to correct it without voting.
You can't do it by voting. It has to be a revolution.
Well, it does have to be a revolution, but how do we go about creating a revolution that's a nonviolent revolution?
I don't know if that's ever happened in history.
Well, because I'm
not saying like extraordinarily low probability events. Of course, this one would be a first time event ever in history. I'm not saying that could never happen, but that's not what the yardstick of history tells us.
I'd just rather not be an advocate of violence.
I'm with you there, man. I'm hoping I get buried safely in my grave before this stuff all really goes where I think it's going.
Yeah. Did you listen to have you listened to that interview that we did with Alistair McLeod last week?
Yep. I just listened to it this morning.
Did you listen to the after the call segment?
Yeah, I was really interested to hear how bearish he really is.
It's amazing. And the part that really sticks with me is when I was questioning him about how do we function without euros, without dollars, without ruples. How do we function? And he says, we don't. We starve. People that don't have items for barter are going to starve. And once people, and that's the issue for me, is because that's what history really shows is that when people are starving, and as Gerald Celente says, when people have nothing to lose, they lose it. And that's the point that terrifies me, and it terrifies Mr. McLeod as well. And that's where I do not want our society to get to. Look at what happened when they ran this test a few months ago when they shut down the soup line, I'm sorry, the EBT system for 5 hours. Do you remember that happening?
When was this? I don't remember.
It was about 3 months ago, and it was a Saturday afternoon. EBT system, not for J.P. Morgan, which they have the lion's share, but it was one of the other criminal banking operations. Their system went offline for, like I said, 5 hours. They were rioting in at least 3 different cities.
I don't know how I missed that.
Yeah, I don't either, because it was all over everywhere. I mean, it was a disaster, a complete disaster. I mean, Zero Hedge had several articles about it. We covered it.
You know, I must have, I'm sure I saw it. I must have kind of pushed it in the back of my mind or something.
Yeah, because it was a pretty big deal. It was right at the end of October, I believe, somewhere around. It was in October, November, early part of November, somewhere in that time frame. Because the speculation was that they were testing, and I still think it was a test because it affected like 15 states. Like I said, they were rioting in 3 different states, in 3 different cities.
You know, unfortunately, ultimately, did you read the book The Road?
I have not read that.
Oh, you should read that, because that's ultimately where I think we're probably headed. Before we get to that point that we were just talking about, where there's complete social rioting and revolution, will the government start a war that escalates into the flinging of nukes before society has a chance of overthrowing the government?
Well, I think that there's speculation right now that that's what's happening in Ukraine, is that world governments are trying to get ahead of the information age, because there's a whole lot of people waking up currently, and they're waking up at a very rapid pace. It's a big Brzezinski in 2010 said that it was easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people. I personally believe that that's what's happening with the situation in Ukraine. I think that Putin is putting on a really great show, good cop, bad cop with Obama, that they're working in concert. I may be completely wrong, but that's what I see, is that they're going to foul everything to the point to where bombs are flying. Why else would China have conducted a test and did an analysis, what was it, 2 months ago or 3 months ago, regarding what kind of nuclear fallout would happen if they were to drop an ICBM on the West Coast? How deep would it go? That, once again, that was covered, fairly good coverage on multiple websites. And I mean, they actually had
I remember that. I don't think I had this conversation with can't remember who it was. Another interview I did about 2 weeks ago, and I just think that it would be impossible for the guys who are running superpower countries to work in concert, because ultimately, again, I just rely on history as my guide.
Okay.
Ultimately, hubris and ego gets in the way, and I just don't see. I honestly think China hates the U.S. I mean,
yes.
You know, and so I don't ever see China and China wants to rule the world again. You know, Russia's getting ready to sign a huge energy deal with China, and it'll settle in rubles and yuan, and it's that's even going to isolate the U.S. even more. I think the more dangerous aspect of all this is I think the U.S. is really starting to isolate itself.
has isolated itself. It's not beginning, it has.
Oh yeah, I mean it's still. I mean they're even pissing off traditional Middle Eastern allies. So
Yes. What has you most concerned right now, and how are you preparing to avoid harm or to capitalize on the situation?
are you talking about sort of geopolitically or with the markets?
What has you, Dave in Denver, the most concerned? What are you keeping a keen eye on?
Really, and this really doesn't. I mean, it's related to precious metals, but again, it's this government totalitarian creep that's been going on, and it's not
Hope.
just it. You know what? I was actually I started focusing on the markets here a little bit.
What's going on with the market?
Well, the S&P futures are pushing all-time highs here. Gold is up. I'm just looking at the futures basis. Gold's up $6, but it's well off its highs, of course, being Friday.
Yes.
And silver was green, and now it's red again. It's at 2035. So,
Well, they couldn't stand seeing that 21 on there. They had to get that off and keep it off as long as possible.
I think they're more worried about 1425 area on gold.
They are terrified.
Exactly. So and this dollar's selling off. Also, I think the Janet Yellen's entire presentation was designed to spike the dollar back over 80 and to beat the crap out of gold. I don't think she really cared that much what happened to the S&P, and they actually bounced the S&P. It closed 10 points above its lows after it took a dump when she started her press conference. But I think her primary motivation for what she said was to jawbone the dollar back above 80,
Yeah.
and then to hit gold, which
Of course.
do go kind of hand in hand in a way.
Yes. Well, I mean, they have to attack gold in order to make the dollar look better, and in order to continue the charade that the dollar actually has value. But
No question about it. I mean the reserve status of the dollar is that's what gives the U.S. government its power.
yes,
They almost lost control of it in 2011 when if they didn't step in there and hammer gold was going into the 2000s. And this nonsense that it was overbought, there were too many bulls, blah blah blah. That was motivated manipulation. I mean, we know that there was serious amounts of physical gold that were dropped on the market in London when gold was at 1900 when they started smashing it in September. And I think they attacked silver first because silver got hit at the end of I think it was the end of April because silver's easier to manipulate than gold, and that's why I think we're seeing relative weakness in silver right now relative to gold because it's there's going to be the hedge funds have these correlation trades on and gold silver ratio trades. So if they beat down silver, it forces hedge funds to start selling gold to keep their algorithms and their trading models in line. You see what I'm saying?
yes, makes perfect sense.
But getting back to your question about what worries me the most, I mean, I think kind of on a broad level, this it's kind of a slow government creep of totalitarianism, and people that do what we do and read sites like yours, Zero Hedge, and blogs like mine. I mean, they're well aware of what's going on, but it's a small minority in this country. Although
Yes.
I think it's starting to broaden a little bit. But most of the people that I know, when I start talking to them about Obamacare or the NSA stuff, it's like, well, there's nothing I can do about it. Whatever, I don't care.
Yes.
Because it's just this slow creep where the government does it slowly. When they make a slight change in something that gives them more control, you don't really notice it.
Unless you're paying attention.
Pardon me?
Unless you're paying attention.
Unless you're really paying attention. Right, exactly. And unfortunately, most people aren't paying attention. They don't want to be bothered with it. Or they take the attitude, well, there's nothing I can do about it.
Yes, which that's primarily what I run into is there's nothing that I can do about it. I guess you.
I had people. I had probably the majority of people who I, tried to confront about the NSA stuff, and these are people that aren't. They don't do what we do, and none of them own gold.
Right.
They were like they could care less if the NSA listens into their phone calls or monitors their Facebook posts or whatever. They could care less. It's complete apathy, and that also is what gives the government power, because they know they can do. Look at Congress.
Yeah.
Congress does whatever it wants. I mean, you can't tell me that Obama represents any part of what he got elected on.
Nothing.
And yet there's still, 40% of the people who voted for Obama still support him. And they slavishly support him. I have a good friend of mine from New York he's like, and my parents are the same way. They're like, just blind liberals where they know what Obama's doing is wrong. They still support him.
Yeah, it's like
makes sense.
That does not make. Unfortunately, I am all too aware of what you just said, because that's exactly what my experience as well, and it boggles my mind how someone could look at a murderer and say, "Well, that's okay. I'm good with that. He's fine."
If it doesn't directly affect them and their family, I think they're just kind of like out of sight, out of mind. I don't care.
It's not in their living room.
Exactly.
It's not reported on the television news, so they don't see it. And so therefore, it must not have any relationship to their life. So therefore, it doesn't matter.
As long as it doesn't get in the way of their watching reality TV and eating their McDonald's, they don't care.
Thank you very much. I have a two-part question regarding Ukraine and Germany, and this goes back to the article that you wrote about a week or so ago that we cited with Mr. McLeod. And the U.S. Treasury, Federal Reserve, which to me is one and the same, has agreed to give Germany their gold back. The German authorities accepted a 7-year plan to deliver a paltry 300 tons, with it being reported that Blackwater was on the ground in Ukraine at the same time the Ukrainian gold went missing. What are the odds are that the missing Ukrainian gold is actually in Germany? And will Germany ever get their gold back without a war?
The first part of your question, in terms of where did the Ukrainian gold go? Unfortunately, there's no way. There's no way of knowing. My initial thinking was that it was gold that was going to be used to deliver into China, because I think a default to Germany is not a big deal, right? They're allies of ours. They're political, economic allies, military allies. So. And then that's what we saw when Germany asked for their gold back. They originally wanted more than 300 tons. And then, the request disappeared from the headlines for a while. And then I don't remember the exact timing, 10 days or 2 weeks later, all of a sudden this deal was announced for 300 tons over 7 years. And everyone who does what we do was like, right. The gold's not there to send back. And obviously that was confirmed by the reports that, they've only received 5 tons, and it wasn't even in bar form. It had to be recast into LBMA standard bars. Yeah. But if we default to China, that's the recipe for a war. China's not going to capitulate on a default like that. And so without having proof of knowing exactly where the gold went, my first thought was that it ended up in China. Now, it very well could have ended up in Germany, and it'll be interesting we'll know, because at some point Germany is going to have to make another report on how much gold's been delivered.
Yeah.
So we'll know, and then then we'll understand what the ultimate destination was for that gold. What was interesting to me that was kind of lost all of this is that when the U.S. went into Libya's gold disappeared as well. So who knows where it went? I think it went to China. I think that there is such a shortage of gold that is available to meet China's demand that, Libya's gold went there. And if you recall, Goldman tried to get Venezuela to cough up the gold that Chavez had repatriated. I don't know if you remember this, but about 2 months ago, Goldman made this big press release that they were about ready to reach a gold lease agreement with Venezuela
Yes, I do remember that.
on the 160 tons that Venezuela repatriated.
Yes.
And Venezuela came out shortly after that and said, "No, we never agreed to this."
Don't know what you're talking about.
And I'm convinced that that was Goldman on behalf of the U.S. government going in there and trying to get Venezuela to cough up their gold on a lease deal so they could ship it to China.
So you would agree that there is no gold either in A, the COMEX, or B, the LBMA?
Well, I think both are a very highly fractionalized system. And in fact, I'm in the process I put out a report on GLD back in '09 talking about how fraudulent it was. And I'm in the process, it's going to take a lot of time to do it, but I'm updating it and I'm going to make it a little more in depth and a little more comprehensive. I think that the entire Western gold system is highly fractionalized. So I think at any given time, if the COMEX were to be audited, I think that they would actually have the amount of unencumbered physical gold sitting in the COMEX vaults that they're reporting is sitting in the vaults. Now, that's not to say that the bars the bars may well be sitting there, but are they encumbered by leases? And it's
Yes.
the same issue with the Fed's gold. It's starting to look like the Fed's gold isn't even there, which is what I had originally thought way back when I started in on the precious metals back in late 2001. And occasionally they show pictures of gold sitting in Fort Knox or whatever. I mean, it's pure propaganda.
Pure propaganda.
Yeah, the gold may be there, but can we please see whether or not there's leases attached to it? And that's the type of information that GATA tried to get at when they filed their Freedom of Information suit against the Fed, and the Fed spent a ton of money to squash the suit. So to me, it's just, all the dotted lines, and I don't even think they're really dotted lines anymore. To me, it's pretty clear that the gold that's being represented is being owned by the Federal Reserve or sitting in the COMEX or sitting in the LBMA, not really there.
And I would agree with that wholeheartedly. I don't think the Federal Reserve has had any of our gold that belongs to you and I. I don't think that they've had it for a number of years. I think it's been gone for a very long time.
Probably since the late '60s, which is why Nixon had to close the gold window.
Yes, that would be my guess as well. Either that or shortly, very early into the '70s, it was completely drained.
The other issue that I've been thinking about that a lot of people don't remember this, but it really stuck in my mind. I think it was in the summer of 2012, and it was one of Ron Paul's last chances to grill Bernanke. And he asked Bernanke, if gold isn't money, then why do central banks continue to hold it? And Bernanke kind of looked puzzled and goes, "Oh, I don't know, maybe out of tradition."
Yes.
Well, isn't it interesting that something that's held out of tradition, central banks are so unwilling to let us go in there and actually audit it? What's the big secret if it's not money and it's being held out of tradition? Let's see it. It's simple.
Exactly. Let's see.
That was part of what triggered the German move to repatriate. Was they wanted to come over here and inspect their gold.
Yes.
Reportedly, it's being held in 9 different Fed vaults, and the Fed would only let them look at the gold in one vault. It's like, okay, well, what do you have to hide? If it's really there, I just want to see it. I want to put my hands on it. I want to look at the serial numbers. I want to look at your records to see if there's lease agreements attached to this gold.
Yes, let's start with it's physically there. We'll start with that, and then we'll look at the numbers.
In terms of Germany's situation, again, I remember, and I don't remember who wrote it. It was a long time ago, but I remember there was an issue of whether or not the Bundesbank was leasing its gold to the LBMA because and this was like, I don't know, 2002, 2003. I wish I had saved the article. And I distinctly remember the guy saying, if it ever becomes public back, that Germany has leased out or sold its gold, the German people will revolt, because the German people understand gold much more keenly than the American public does. There's always been an implicit agreement between the government and the people there that they would never give up their gold again. It was always going to be theirs. And yet here they are. They're in a situation where the gold's probably gone. And it's, if it was a couple hundred tons, probably not an issue. You can replace that. But if you're talking a couple thousand tons that's missing, imagine what that would do to the price if the Bundesbank went into the market and said, "Hey, someone offer us 1,000 tons of gold. What price can you do it at?"
Yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting exercise to do. I mean, we see China taking delivery off the Shanghai Gold Exchange on a daily basis, anywhere usually between 10 and 20 tons a day. And they're able to import that kind of size into their country without pushing up the price of gold too much, at least up to this point in time. But what would happen if some entity came out and said, "Someone offer me 1,000 tons of gold"? What price would someone be willing to sell that amount? Think about who we know really is holding 1,000 tons. Where would the Chinese reoffer 1,000 tons of gold?
It wouldn't be at 1,300, I can tell you that.
I'm not sure it would be in four digits.
I'm not either. I'm not either. I don't think that would happen.
There'd be a price for sure, but
there's definitely a price. I mean, but like you said, I don't think that it's four digits. I think that there's at least one more zero going to be included on that.
Right, 100 tons, because they know where they can offer 100 tons and probably get it replaced within a week.
With that said, you saying that the Shanghai Gold Exchange is moving 10 to 20 tons a day. I'm going to take exception to that number because of Koos Jensen's tireless work with the Shanghai Gold Exchange and his reporting on that. And it's about between anywhere from 35 to 50 tons a week. So the 10 would be about as high as I would be willing to go.
Well, actually, last night, 18 tons were delivered.
Really?
Yeah, wow. Up until
wow.
we get a it's a very expensive 3 time a day bullion market report. It's called Gold Jottings by John Brimlow, and
okay.
It's very, very expensive. It's worth it though, because he dredges up data that I haven't been able to replicate. Otherwise, we wouldn't pay for it if I could.
Well, then I'll eat those words. I know that.
You can actually go to the Shanghai Gold Exchange website, and they report their daily deliveries. And
yes.
I've been meaning to write about it, but the numbers aren't fresh off the top of my head. But it wasn't until until the yuan really started declining against the dollar, the premiums over in Shanghai were anywhere from $5 to high teens, and people mistakenly associate high premiums over there with the degree of demand, and really what it is when the premiums are high, it means not enough gold is flowing into China to make deliveries on the exchange. When the premium started coming down, all of a sudden there was a lot of deliveries being made on the Shanghai exchange. There was a couple days in there last month where there was low 20s a day being delivered.
Wow.
And that there was 1 week where there was at least 90 tons delivered.
Oh my goodness.
So if just off the top of my head this week, I think we had 8 tons for the first few days, and then 10 tons, I think Wednesday and Thursday, and then 18 tons last night. 13 tons. I have the number in my email, but
well, and then with what you just said, Dave, it's obvious that the Chinese demand is still insatiable. And in 2013, China moved every ounce of global mining production of gold through the Shanghai Gold Exchange, maybe even a little bit more than the actual global production. India is now taking steps to relax their stranglehold on the gold market, which should reopen the known gold market in India as opposed to the underground gold market. The Shanghai Gold Exchange and later this year or in early 2015, the Moscow Gold Exchange and the Singapore Gold Exchange are both going to open. Is this the long arm, in your opinion, is this the long arm of the Rothschilds extending their reach, or will the combination of these actual physical markets seize control of the gold and silver global pricing mechanism?
I think eventually, I think the latter is what I think is going to happen. I think the physical is going to blow up the paper market.
Do you think that? Do you see Moscow? They're moving that project forward. The Singapore Gold Exchange, which is the one that Jim Sinclair is sitting in high office on, or he's one of the officers in their development stage. You see those two along with the Shanghai Gold Exchange. Are they just going to take over?
Well, let's not discard the Dubai Exchange either.
That one as well. Thank you.
Yeah. I think that's why they're being. I think what we're seeing is the transfer of political and economic power from the west to the east, and underneath it all, movement of gold from the west to the east is sort of at the root of it. I mean, it's the centuries-old adage: "He who controls the gold makes the rules."
There you go.
And anytime there's ever been a military invasion in history, the first thing that the invading army did was go and seize the gold. If you go watch the HBO's it was a 2-season series called Rome, and I didn't know this until I saw the series. It was fantastic. They tried to make it as historically authentic as possible, and I read about that when they were creating the series. They spent like $250 million, and it only lasted 2 seasons.
Wow.
HBO couldn't make money on it. But he had a point of showing that, like when he went into Gaul, he took their gold. And his symbol of power was a pure gold eagle that he carried on a post. And that was his signal of power. And to me, I don't think that sort of, call it a law of economics. I don't think it's ever changed. I think it's still there. I think that's why the governments are so secretive about their gold, because if the gold's not there, they don't have the power.
Right. Well, and I tend to agree with the folks that say that we actually are on a gold standard. It's just you just can't see it. I think that, and I tend to agree with that line of thinking, simply because, or in spite of someone like Bernanke saying, that gold is a tradition or a barbarous relic or is inconsequential. I think that is in lockstep with the other lies that are a 180-degree turn from the reality of the situation.
It's funny. I was just thinking about that a couple days ago. I've kind of come to the conclusion that Bernanke really, he's so full of hubris and he's so arrogant. I actually think that he maybe truly believes that. I think he thinks he figured out a way to have a fiat currency system that doesn't need gold. I really do. On the other hand, I know Greenspan knows the truth. When you look at that essay he wrote in 1966, Gold and Economic Freedom.
There you have it.
He knows the truth. He was arrogant, but I don't think he's afflicted with hubris the way Bernanke is. Greenspan sold out. His career was saved by Henry Kissinger. Most people aren't aware of this, but Kissinger and Greenspan went to Bronx Science together. And Kissinger came along when Greenspan's econometric forecasting firm was about ready to go belly up and saved him. And so Greenspan sold out, but he knows the truth. I'm not sure if Bernanke really knows the truth.
Yeah, I don't think Greenspan is part of the club anymore. I think that, he's part of the club, but I don't think that he gets the firsthand information the way that Bernanke would.
Probably not. They sent him off to, I think he lives in London now. I think he has a vacation home in Switzerland. They set him out to pasture.
Yeah, hooked him up.
he surfaces and says something crazy and then everyone goes, "Oh, he's senile now," which is probably true. But occasionally, he would, when they would have those, they used to call them the Humphrey Hawkins testimonies, and then they call them something else now. But occasionally, Ron Paul would engage him, and Bernanke would drop statements, and I don't think they were slip-ups. I think they were intentional, so that people like us it was a signal to us that he's smarter than he's leading on. Where I remember one time he admitted that the current fiat dollar system was a big experiment. And the party line is that, well, the central bank functions as the gold standard does because we use our intellect and our judgment to decide what the supply of money should be and what the level of interest rates should be. And that's just BS. That's the party line. And he was great at, and that's really where it transitioned, was in the late 70s from Volcker to him, where the party line became, hey, the central bank is your gold standard. We're smarter than the laws of economics, and we know what interest rates should be and what the money supply should be. We regulate that. Well, obviously they don't.
Right.
They control it, but
they control
it. Point. But they don't. It's not a substitute for the gold standard. And I do remember the one time that he sort of dropped in there. Well, this is one big experiment. Fortunately, Ron Paul would never really follow up with that. He'd move on to the next thing and start pontificating, so we knew that he understood Austrian economics.
Well, I like Ron Paul, and I think...
Oh, I do too. Don't get me wrong.
I think I would agree with what I believe you're saying is that he missed some really great opportunities to really expose these liars and thieves for the criminals that they are.
Yes.
I mean, because, when he had, just like when he had Bernanke on the ropes and that testimony that you referred to a moment ago, I mean, he should have been laying into him when he called gold a tradition and said that gold is not money. I mean, the door was not only open, it didn't exist. And he could have just pounded on him at that point. I mean, I'm not down in, Ron Paul. I know that there's certain things that he has to do, or certain guidelines and so forth that he has to follow. However, he really should have seized that moment right there.
There were several of them over the years. When he used to spar with Greenspan, and then when he would go after Bernanke. I'm not really sure, why he never did. I'm sure a lot of it has to do with politics.
Yeah, I'm sure of that. Dave, it's been an hour. And I said that it was going to be 15 minutes, no more than 30.
If I didn't have movers coming, I'd go another hour. I love to talk about this stuff.
I do too, and it'll probably be more than I'm trying to target 15 minutes, but obviously there's a whole lot more than 15 minutes out of this conversation.
I've never read any of those beliefs or feelings in his writing.
Yes.
I figured he was bearish, but I didn't know he was almost as bearish as I am.
Well, I mean, it's a terrifying situation for those that have eyes to see and ears to hear.
It is.
I mean, it's like, so it's good Lord. But anyway, I really appreciate your time and your generosity with your time. I sincerely mean that, and I would like to follow up with you in a few weeks and see if we can't do this again.
I don't know if you ever read this stuff by William Engdahl.
No.
He does great. Google him. He does great geopolitical work. I don't always read his stuff, but I read his analysis of Ukraine. This guy really knows his stuff, his geopolitical history and facts and what's going on and how to read the tea leaves. And a lot of the things that he said about Ukraine meshed with what Jim Willey was saying. And like part of the underlying premise of it is the U.S. went in there to try and attack the Chinese, and the Russians are starting to develop a non-dollar petrodollar, a petro yuan or whatever it's going to be.
Yeah.
And that was part of the impetus to go into Ukraine, was to try and blow that up. And Jim Willey said it, and then this guy Engdahl said it. And obviously another part of it was the U.S. is trying to circle Russia and China with missile bases.
Yes.
And that was a big part of Ukraine also. But there was also what's going on. There's a big movement now, and it's become visible to blow up the petrodollar.
And which is, I can't blame them. I mean,
well, they say goodbye to the dollar reserve if that happens.
Well, I mean, but you know that the dollar, the petrodollar, has a stranglehold on the global economy. Period.
Oh yeah, the petrodollar is the dollar reserve. That's the reserve standard right there. And then if that blows up, the dollar is no longer the reserve currency.
You know, and when these countries, in particular, like Russia and China, India, and they're watching Egypt. We'll use the so-called Arab Spring, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when Egypt blew up, and that blew up simply because the Federal Reserve turned the pipeline on just a little bit, and it blew their economy up. Or am I completely wrong?
Oh no, that's in there. The U.S. is in there creating unrest in all these countries.
Yes, but specifically, that's what happened with the Egyptian situation, as far as their economy going to hell in a handbag overnight. Is that the Federal Reserve? What I'd read was that they'd sent specifically all these dollars into the Egyptian economy, and it created this massive inflation.
I remember reading that too. There's no question about it, and that's why Paul Craig Roberts and I had a conversation about whether the Chinese wanted their currency to be the reserve currency or not. And he had brought up a point that it was sitting there waiting to be analyzed, but he's right about it. And in fact, he told me he was over there years ago advising them against having the reserve currency, because if they have full convertibility of their currency, it gives the U.S. the power to attack the currency. And so that's why he thinks, and I agree with him now after having had the conversation with him, that whatever the replacement is for the dollar, it's not going to be a single country currency, because then the U.S. can just print dollars and go in there and attack it.
Well, and with that, as well as I do, most people don't own precious metals, but and a lot of the alternative news is focused on different types of collapse, as far as an economic collapse or a grid down collapse. What would happen if the dollar went away? What would happen to, how would we function? What would my neighborhood look like?
You'd have a barter system in place until something came in, and because if the dollar goes away, that means the government's power goes away, and that means there's going to be an overthrow of the government. At some point, I think it's been guys like Sinclair have always said, keep 2 to 3 months worth of precious metals on hand that you can use for barter for that very purpose. At some point, the chaos will be organized into organized chaos, and you'll start having commerce again in some form. It just won't be the dollar that is the medium of transaction.
Right.
And actually, we should probably wind this down, because I know these movers are coming in a few minutes. But kind of circle back to your original question. How am I preparing to against my worst fears of what's going on in this country? And that going back to the early 2000s, people have asked me, well, what am I supposed to do about all this? And this was before the first housing bubble collapse. And I said, well, I can tell you what you need to do to protect yourself to get through what's coming, but you got to decide if you want to see what the other side looks like. And really, even if you have precious metals and a propane supply and a year's worth of food, etc., everything that we know, the checklist that we know to survive.
Right.
I don't think it's going to do you any good unless you get out of the country and go somewhere that's out of the reach of big government. I really don't.
Okay, that's interesting. Yes, I hear that more and more. Unfortunately, that the United States is going to be the new Australia, where it's just going to be one gigantic prison. With the slave labor being the citizens. And
It seems hard to imagine that that's really, as for doomsday and bearish as I am, it's hard for me to envision that. And again, for me, it's always the issue of, is there going to be a global military conflict that breaks out before we get to that point? I think the scenario that you're talking about as a possibility, I think that assumes that U.S. government power, the global power, stays intact, and there's not a war going on.
Do you think that if there is a war, do you think that it would break out? Do you think that there would be battles fought here in the United States?
I wouldn't be worried about bullets flying. I'd be worried about nukes flying.
Okay.
I mean, part of the basis of war all throughout history was I refer to it as cull the herd. I mean,
yes.
I will say this, and I guess we can end with this.
Okay.
There's a local businessman here in Denver who I'm friendly with, and he gets everything we do. Although he thinks it's going to have a good ending because he's an eternal optimist. But he has a neighbor who's a retired. I think he was a 2-star general. Spent a lot of time in the Pentagon. Still has a lot of conversations and contacts there. And the guy that I know asked his neighbor, the retired general, and he said, how bad is it really? And the retired general looked at him and he said, well, how much gold and silver do you own? And my friend told him, and he said, okay, how many bullets, how much ammunition do you have stored up? My friend told him, and the general looked at him and said, that's not enough. And so my buddy said, well, how bad is it really? And the guy just looked at him and said, you don't want to know. And I'm sure he didn't go into details because he doesn't want to go on record as being the guy who's opening Pandora's box about what's really going on. But
yeah,
it kind of tells you that, what we know and what we think we know about how bad things really are, they're probably even worse.
Well, all right, and I really can't thank you enough, and I really appreciate all of your time.
No problem, and a couple weeks down the road or a month down the road, I would love to do it again.
Okay, well, we'll do that then, and I'll just I'll send you an email and say, can we do it this time, and we'll just move forward from there.
That sounds great, Rory.
All right, buddy. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Speak to you soon. Bye.